my little face.
I got to bring up my slides so I can, there we go. Alrighty. Okay, I guess here we go.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Sure enough. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your new hire presentation for emergency and safety guidelines for Whitman-Walker Health. My name is Tom Voslow, Director of Facilities and Property Management. My pronouns are he, him, his. I have been the Director of Facilities and Property Management with Walker since 2004. And basically, the responsibilities of my department are anything dealing with the building itself, building infrastructure, the facilities as far as HVAC, security, housekeeping, plant maintenance, and basic infrastructure maintenance and sustainability. So I welcome you all here as your new hires to Whitman-Walker. So what we're going to be covering today in the emergency and the safety guidelines presentation will be a number of items which we deem are the most important aspects of information that you need to know as an employee of Whitman-Walker when you're on any one of our locations and any one of our sites. So the things
Tom, I'm going to stop you.
Yeah.
So I want you to do it again and speak broad, and instead of saying hire, just say like a staff member, because we're going to use this for both new hires and volunteers.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So if you just take it back to the beginning and then I think it's just, for all staff, these are things we want all staff to know, stuff like that.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
Whenever you're ready. I know it feels really weird. You gotta kind of get into
like talking to nobody.
I know you have to kind of get into the groove of it. So all the presenters I've done this with so far, they're like, okay, thank you, director. Let me know. Take one, take two. So, give yourself to a couple of chances.
Yeah.
Plus, there's no
would be looking towards the camera and at the slides at the same time.
Right. Right. I mean, I think you just, kind of try to authentically. We're not going to have your video, like your face won't be here. So I think you'll be, you'll be good to go. But it does feel like you literally are just talking to the computer. So it's a little weird.
Okay.
Okay. Whenever you are ready,
sure
I'm gonna mute my end now.
Okay. Welcome everyone to the presentation for emergency and safety guidelines at Whitman-Walker Health. My name is Tom Voslow. I'm the Director of Facilities and Property Management. My pronouns are he, him, his. I have been in the position of Director of Facilities since September of 2004. And basically the responsibilities of the facilities department are building maintenance, plant maintenance, housekeeping, security, parking, and other aspects dealing with emergency preparedness, building infrastructure maintenance, and sustainability. So I welcome you all to this presentation. And the items that I'm going to be covering today are essentially items that we think that you should know as an employee or volunteer when you are on site at any one of our locations. The information is important for you to know so that in the event that there may be arise a situation, you'll have some information to know how to properly respond and any sort of action that you may have to take. So you'll be seeing the agenda here of the items that we're going to be covering today. We'll talk about the safety committee. We'll talk about our duress and panic button policy. We'll talk about the emergency codes policy, active shooter information, emergency evacuation policy, and then finally general safety information. Whitman-Walker does have a safety committee. It is interdisciplinary. and it is intra-site staffed. So essentially, we have representation from almost every department within the organization, and there is representation from basically all of our sites, Northwest as well as Southeast. So what sorts of things does the safety committee take care of? Well, essentially, the members of the safety committee, it's a two-way sort of communication. There's information going from employees to the safety representatives to the committee, and then the safety committee takes that information back via their representatives to the respective sites and to the respective employees and the locations in the departments. Okay? The things that the safety committee will take a look at is any sort of safety concerns, safety policies, and procedures, and they will take a look at the actions, evaluate any policies, any procedures, and make sure that they seem to be reasonable and achievable, and then they will approve that information or make recommendations, and then ultimately a policy will be approved and then promulgated throughout the organization. The safety committee is chaired by two individuals, myself as the director of facilities, and is co-chaired by Stella Johnson, who is our director of compliance. The year 2020 is the 50th anniversary of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and it is OSHA which is mandated the presence of safety committees within business organizations as a part of the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. And OSHA's responsibility is to provide legal guidance and standards for safety within every sort of workplace throughout the country. So for those of you who may have worked in organizations before that may have had a duress or panic button policy and procedure in place, this information should be relatively familiar with you. For those who have not worked in an organization where you have not experienced a situation with the use of a duress or panic button, this will be new information to you. Essentially, the terms duress button and panic button are interchangeable. So I list them concurrently on the slides so that there is no confusion when I'm talking about these terms and the use of these devices. So what is a duress and or a panic button? Essentially, it is a silent alarm that when activated will go to the central monitoring station of a security company. It doesn't go directly to a police department, but it goes through a contracted security vendor contracted by the organization. And what they will do is they will receive a discrete signal from that specific location when activated. And the signal is so discrete enough that it will actually notify the security agency that of the address where the signal originates from, as well as the location within that address. Where do we have duress and panic buttons located within Whitman-Walker? They are located at every one of our locations, at every one of our sites in Northwest and Southeast. The Max Robinson Center, our Eastern Market locations, 1525 14th Street, and 1377 R Street Northwest. When activated, and the signals received by the central monitoring station of the security company, the security company will in turn notify the local 911 system that a emergency response is required to that particular location. So we do have a standing protocol. So when certain types of panic buttons are activated, it will immediately generate a MPD response without question to go to the location. In other situations, when a panic button is activated, the central monitoring station will notify individuals on a recall list at that organization that a device has been activated and to verify whether emergency assistance is required. What are some of the reasons for the possible activation of a duress or panic button? There's basically a few reasons. First of which would be a robbery at a location which would be a cash handling point, such as a client check-in desk where people have the opportunity to do their copay in cash, or at the pharmacy where individuals are purchasing and paying for prescriptions, sometimes in cash, or because a possible robbery could actually be the theft of pharmaceuticals out of one of the pharmacies. Another reason for the possible activation would be that there's a patient or an individual threatening you, the staff member, someone else in the facility, or the facility itself with some sort of harm. And the possibility of making a 911 call or a 911 text or activating our internal telephone paging system is not a feasible option. Or lastly, there's an individual in the health center who is displaying a weapon. On this slide, you'll see the locations of duress buttons within our Southeast DC locations at the Max Robinson Center, as well as the Youth Services and Care Navigation Services locations within our Eastern Market sites. If you'll take a look at, for example, the Max Robinson Center, there are 2 buildings at that location. So, for example, locations where the duress buttons are located would be the check-in, check-out desk, the nurse's station, and the HIV testing and counseling office. If you look at the additional Max Robinson location, you'll see there are panic buttons at the pharmacy. So just by some of the examples of what were located on the previous slide for reasons for activation of the panic or duress buttons, you have cash handling points as well as prescription dispensing points. This next slide shows the locations of our panic buttons located within the 2 buildings located in Northwest Washington, D.C. We have one at our client check-in desk at the main administrative site at 1377 R Street, and then at our main clinical site at 1525 14th Street. Basically, there is coverage on every floor with the exception of the 6th floor, which is a controlled access area limited to staff only. If you look at the 1525 14th Street location, essentially every one of the client check-in desks is covered from the lower level all the way up to the 5th floor, as well as the main floor pharmacy and our main lobby concierge desk. Also, the 3 behavioral health counseling offices located within the medical areas on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors also have panic buttons within those offices. The next couple of slides you'll see show the physical representation of what the duress buttons look like at our different locations. So this slide shows the duress button at the main clinical location on 14th Street, the administrative law office on 14th Street, the medical clinic area at Southeast at Max Robinson, as well as the Eastern Market. Now, when activated with this device, that little red tab you see in the center of the screen will pop out. That is an indication that the device has been activated. The device you see on this page is a typical duress button located at the client services desks on the lower level, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 5th, and the 5R floors at 1525 14th Street Northwest. The way it's activated is that little beveled edge you see at the bottom, you flip it down, and that activates the device itself. The last slide that shows a duress button are the kinds that are located at our group counseling rooms in our Eastern Market locations. A couple of tips for informational purposes when a duress or panic button is activated. Know where the building's panic buttons are within the respective area of your workstation. Make sure the team members within your work group know where the panic buttons are as well. The reason we tell you that is in the event there is an emergency and you may be the individual nearest to a panic button, you may be the one who needs to activate that so that emergency response is requested, because individuals in the area where an event is developing or occurring may not have a panic button near them. So you as a team member or a volunteer may be the one closest to one of these devices that can activate it and in turn request emergency assistance to our building. Also, in the event that we have an active shooter, a panic button is another device to summon emergency assistance to the location where the active shooter or workplace violence situation may be occurring. Individuals who are notified when a panic button is activated are myself, our Senior Director of Clinical Infrastructure and Operations, Dwayne Gasser, and the Max Robinson Eastern Market Site Operations Manager, Adisa Bakari, for those instances where an event may be occurring in our Southeast sites. One thing to remember is the panic button is a silent alarm. The only person who knows that it has been activated is the individual who activates it. The next group of policies we're going to talk about are our emergency codes policy. When we consolidated operations in our main building at 1525 14th Street Northwest a number of years ago, we decided to consolidate a number of our emergency procedures and policies. So what this entailed was taking our different policies regarding how each site responded to an emergency and put them all together into a consolidated document. What we also did at the same time was to take a relatively recent emergency procedure that used color codes to designate different types of emergencies, and we overlaid those color codes over top of our existing emergency policies and procedures. And so what the purpose of that was to provide a color-coded system that established a uniform method of conveying information about the nature of an emergency, so that when that notification was broadcast, employees and volunteers would know how to respond appropriately. Okay. For those of you who will be getting an ID badge with your picture on it, the Human Resources Department should also provide you with what I call a cheat sheet badge, which we'll take a look at in some future slides here. And that cheat sheet badge basically shows you what the color code is and what type of emergency it corresponds to. Okay. So these are the color codes. And for those of you who have worked in medical facilities before, some of you may recognize these color codes. For those of you who have never worked in healthcare situations before, this may be something entirely new to you. However, a lot of people may recognize the color code blue as announcing a medical emergency from those situations where you may have watched a medical show on television in the past, and they announce a code blue stat in such and such a location. That is a very typical example of a color code emergency announcement. So very briefly, the emergency color codes that Whitman-Walker uses are red for fire, orange for bomb threat, yellow for building emergency, and a building emergency may be anything dealing with building infrastructure, such as a loss of water, a loss of power, a loss of HVAC, or anything which basically affects the operation and infrastructure of the building. Code gray represents a natural disaster. And that could be a tornado, it could be a hurricane, it could be a severe thunderstorm, it could be an earthquake. Code blue, as I previously mentioned, represents a medical emergency. Code black represents a behavioral health emergency, for which there is a separate protocol that our behavioral health first responders have for their use. And then finally, code purple represents an active shooter situation or a workplace violence threat. How do we announce emergencies within the building? Essentially, because none of our facilities are designed with a paging or public address system, what we have available to us for our use is a paging intercom system that is integral to the installed telephone system within the building. And I will be telling you basically how the paging intercom system works, because essentially every phone within our facilities is designed to be used as a public address paging intercom announcing system. Okay. Some guidelines for using the paging intercom system is to remain calm, to speak clearly, and repeat the announcement of the color-coded emergency as many times as is necessary for the information to be broadcast and understood. A typical example, as I previously used, would be a code blue 1525 third floor waiting area. Medical responders, please respond. And that could be announced 2-3 times, whatever is necessary to get the announcement out and broadcast. After the announcement's made, if it's necessary to evacuate the area, or take some other action as the situation requires. Also, if you were the individual to make an announcement over the paging intercom system because you were the individual first witnessing the development of the situation, or are the individual in charge of that particular area, you may be required to submit information to the Whitman-Walker management for an incident report and to provide information to first responders when they arrive on the scene. The next couple of slides basically are a visual prompt to show you how an emergency can be broadcast over the telephone paging intercom system. The telephone system is relatively user-friendly, and this is a typical example of what you'll see as the screen on a telephone. So what you'll need to do is make sure that the telephone is logged in, and down at the bottom of the screen you'll see the various menu options in the taskbar. The 3 dots represent a continuance of the menu options for the telephone. So when you need to make an announcement, what you'll do is you see the 3 dots, so you'll press the button underneath those 3 dots to sequence to the next screen on the telephone. So if you look down on the taskbar, you'll see the paging menu button. You want to depress that as the next step. Once you've depressed the paging button, then you'll see it still in your taskbar on the bottom of the screen, and that means you're almost ready to go ahead and make the announcement using the telephone. So essentially, the telephone handset, the mouthpiece, is the microphone for making your announcements. The small speaker on the left-hand side of the telephone is where any broadcast announcement will be coming from. So once you see the little paging button in the bottom of the screen, go ahead and pick up the handset of the phone and be prepared to go ahead and make the announcement. And you must also realize that the announcement is real time. So whatever you say during your broadcast announcement of an emergency is what everyone will be hearing from the respective telephone sets within their offices and other work locations. So once you're ready to go, make sure you're ready to know what information you're going to put out over the broadcast, and go ahead and make the announcement. As I previously gave you an example, you'll want to say the name, the code, color code. You'll want to say the location within the building and whatever action needs to be occurring, such as a medical first responder, behavioral health first responder, evacuation, shelter in place, etc. Repeat the announcement as many times as is necessary, and then once you complete the announcement, you hang up the handset of the phone, and that completes the paging.
Tom, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be working from home. If I get a phone call from a client, sorry, Tom, you can hear me back?
Say again?
All right, do you hear that echo?
No.
Okay, why is there an echo? Tom, mute your end really quick.
Mute my end?
Yes. In your, because I feel like, okay, did you mute it?
No, not yet.
And now the echo's gone. Okay, sorry. I heard an echo, and I want to be able to ask the question. I want it to be clear. Okay, no worries. I can cut that part out. Okay, let me
go back some?
Nope, you don't have to go back. Okay, here's my question. I have a question, Tom. If I'm working from home and a patient were to call me, or anyone were to call me and tell me, that they're going to go up to 1525, would I be able to send this duress signal, or do I just call my manager? Would this apply to me if I'm working from home?
So you're receiving a threat to the organization from a client or an individual while you're working at home.
Yes.
So ideally, what you would respond to, are you staying on the phone with them, or they just spoke to you and then hung up and now you're wanting to take an action?
We got on the phone. They got really upset that we couldn't, schedule an appointment for them, and they said that they were going to go to 1525, and I'm nervous that they're going to be violent. They sounded really violent on the phone. Should I just call 911? Should I call my manager and give them a heads up? Do I use an emergency page? What do I do?
Working from home, you are not capable of making a paging intercom announcement. This is only from telephone devices within the physical confines of the building itself.
Okay.
The action you should take is to immediately contact your manager, as well as someone within the security organization at Whitman-Walker itself. So that would either be Megan Davies, Court Cook, or myself.
Okay.
And then we would respectively confer with your manager, and then make a decision about what further action we need to take at the site itself, whether we're going to notify our security at their front doors, whether we're going to call 911, or what additional action we are going to take.
Okay. Thank you.
So once the announcement has been made of whatever the emergency is, what you want to do is you want to hang up the telephone set, and then continue on with whatever action. If you forget to hang up the telephone, you can always press the button that shows in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, which says to end the call, and it'll cut off the announcement as after you've completed making it. If for some reason, in the heat of the moment, you cannot remember what a color code is for a particular type of emergency, that's okay. And if you don't remember the little cheat sheet card that goes along with your access badge that has what the color codes are, that's okay too. The important thing is that the information be promulgated throughout the particular site of what the nature of the emergency is. So if the only thing you can remember is medical patient in distress, third floor waiting room, medical first responders, please respond, or whatever the other type of announcement may be, according to the list that we have of the different types of emergencies, that's okay too. The most important thing is that the announcement be made and promulgated throughout the building so staff and volunteers and other individuals know how to respond accordingly. So the little cheat sheet badge that I was referring to previously is on your screen right now, and there are two sides to it. One shows what the different emergency color codes are and what they correspond to as far as the type of emergency. The reverse side shows you how to respond, and that response may be a total or partial evacuation of the building, a sheltering in place, or following directions of a supervisor or a manager. The small black box that you see on the bottom of the front of the card, please disregard that. That information corresponded to the paging intercom system of our previous telephone system, and these cards are in the process of being updated. Once they're updated, then they'll be distributed to all of our employees and volunteers accordingly. So this slide shows essentially the same thing as was on the cheat sheet card, except it's much larger. And once again, I reiterate that the proper response for any one of our different emergencies could be an evacuation of the building, whether total or partial. It could be a sheltering in place, or it may be just following the guidelines of your supervisor or manager. Or in the situation of an active shooter or a workplace violence event, it may be following the guidance of first responders who are on the scene. This slide shows any potential indicators of workplace violence. This is not an all-inclusive list. This is only a partial list, but there's some of the most common ones when it talks about workplace violence. And you can see the type of list, the type of actions that are here on this list. It could be someone acting out inappropriately, either verbally or physically. It could be an individual making some sort of menacing gesture, throwing objects, individuals with grudges or a particular grievance against a coworker. It could be an attempt by an individual to intimidate or harass other individuals. And it could be somebody who apparently is having a mental health episode and seems to be speaking and acting either inappropriately or indicating that they're not in touch with reality. And once again, this is not an all-inclusive list, but this is a list of common indicators of possible workplace violence. Within the classification of workplace violence, active shooter scenarios are possible, as well as active threat scenarios. The screen that you're seeing now shows a definition of each one of those two different types of scenarios as defined by the Department of Homeland Security. Federal government defines an active shooter as an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill in a confined and populated area as many people as possible through the use of firearms. Whereas an active threat scenario may not involve a gun, but the weapon in turn may be some other sort of device or weapon, such as a switchblade, a machete, a box knife, a pressure cooker bomb. But the intention is still the same. The intention is to kill or maim or injure as many people in a confined and populated area through the use of whatever that weapon is or that device. The statistics also shown on that slide are a few years out of date, but they're the most recent. They're the most recent statistics that I could get a hold of that show the number of workplace violence incidents in the course of a year. And the last recorded year that was available to me was 2016. For this particular slide. The next couple of slides I'm going to show you are statistics from the FBI from 2000 until 2018 dealing with the number of active shooter incidents within the United States. Now, the statistics here could be a little mind-boggling, but the intention is to show you the total number of incidents recorded over the last 18 years. The statistics were not available for 2019 at the time that this was promulgated. And in the year 2020, we don't particularly have any incidents that have been brought to light, either because there have been none or because with the COVID-19 situation and people being locked down, businesses being closed, and the general lack of activity within society, the information is just not available. But what you will see as far as statistics show is the increasing number of events that are occurring within society as far as the number of incidents over this 18-year period, as well as the casualties that are involved in the different periods. What I will bring to your attention on this slide that shows the pie chart on the right-hand side are the location categories. One thing you want to take a look in the lower right-hand corner where it talks about healthcare facilities. And the number of incidents over the last 18 years involving healthcare facilities is 4.3% of the total number of active shooter events. Now, healthcare facilities are pretty encompassing when you're talking about acute care clinics, you're talking about outpatient facilities, you're talking about inpatient facilities, you're talking about long-term care facilities, you're talking about hospitals. So there's any number of different types of organizations and activities that fall under healthcare facilities. But you'll see that the relative number of incidents with regards to active shooter are relatively low in comparison to society in general. In the event that we ever have an active shooter or workplace violent event within any one of the Whitman-Walker sites, the number of things that we need to be aware of are relatively small. What you need to be aware of is anyone who hears or sees what they believe to be an active shooter or a workplace violence event should immediately call 911 and or activate a duress alarm. If it is possible to do so, you would also want to use the paging intercom system on the telephones that I just spoke about a few minutes ago, announcing a code purple and the last known location of the active shooter individual within the organization or within the facility. So once again, if there were ever an active shooter or a workplace violence event with any one of the Whitman-Walker facilities, and you are in the earshot or visual range of that event, contact 911 and or activate the nearest duress alarm to where you're located. And if at all possible, use the paging intercom system to announce a code purple and state the last known location of the shooter within the facility. And the purpose of that is so that when people are evacuating or taking cover, they are not evacuating or moving into the location where the active shooter is and therefore become a target or a victim. Okay. On the bottom of the slide, you'll see a link to a YouTube video called Run, Hide, Fight. This is a training video that was done by the City of Houston, Texas EMS department in conjunction with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security several years ago. The video is a training video, so you know there's a bit of the hokiness and the corniness to how training videos are, but it is also a very good representation of actions which are typically recommended in the event of an active shooter scenario within a workplace or a location. So I recommend that you take about 5 minutes, view the active shooter video on YouTube. And usually when you go onto YouTube and you type in Run, Hide, Fight, it is usually, if not the first video that will show up on your query screen. But what you'll want to see is that particular one, and it usually says DHS with it. In the event we would ever have a workplace violence or an active shooter situation, what's going to happen after the fact? Well, during the course of the situation and the scenario, there are certain Whitman-Walker staff who would communicate and assist law enforcement authorities at the location with whatever information they would need as far as who is involved, what the layout of the building is, different paths of access and egress, and different other information about the building and the organization. After the fact, any Whitman-Walker employee and or volunteer who is involved in that situation, either as a witness or a victim, would provide counseling services as appropriate. And then there would be a formal debrief of the incident after law enforcement has departed, and more information is gathered from the various representatives within the organization of what did we do right, what did we do wrong, how can we improve, what was the overall scope of lessons learned from that incident. One of the last policies that I'm going to cover in this presentation will be emergency evacuation. The emergency evacuation policy is something that is also required by OSHA. The emergency evacuation policy is something that essentially describes, in the event that your facility or any one of the facilities of your organization is damaged as a result of a natural disaster, code gray, some sort of building emergency where you have a loss of power, loss of water or services that affect the infrastructure and operation, code yellow. What is the organization going to do with regards to continued operation? So essentially, the emergency evacuation plans describe the following: when to evacuate location, including whether it's a total or a partial evacuation, how to evacuate, including shutdown procedures, when to return to work after the evacuation, and how to follow up after returning from the evacuation. And it also is going to cover information that's covered in our business continuity plan about what are we going to do with the employees. Will the employees from that particular site work remotely from home? Will they do like time sharing at another facility? What are we going to do with the patients and the people who come for our services at that particular site? So the most visible part of the emergency evacuation are our building evacuation plan maps that you'll see posted throughout the different locations. Some of you will only be working or doing your volunteer time at one of our locations. Some of you may be working or doing volunteer time at multiple Whitman-Walker Health locations. The following several slides basically show you the building evacuation plan samples for all of our different locations within Northwest and Southeast. The slide you're looking at now is for the 1525 14th Street Northwest location. All of our slides are all of the building evacuation plan slides are essentially representing the same sort of information. It shows you the street address. It shows you that it's a building evacuation plan. It shows you what floor you're physically located on. It shows you the primary and secondary egress routes or evacuation routes. If there's a shelter-in-place location on that floor, it shows you as well. It also shows you what the safe assembly point is clear of the building that you're evacuating. This is the building evacuation plan map for the Max Robinson Center in Southeast. There are 2 locations. You're seeing the evacuation routes. You're seeing the safe assembly point. Here's the building evacuation plan map for our main administrative site at 1377 14th Street. You're seeing the evacuation routes. You're seeing the safe assembly point. Here's a different representation of the same evacuation plan for that address. Here's the building evacuation plan map for 1651 Pennsylvania Avenue, our youth services site. Here's another evacuation plan map for that same site in an adjacent building. These 2 sites share the same safe assembly point. If you're a manager or a supervisor, what are your responsibilities with regards to knowing information about our emergency policies and procedures? First of all, you need to review the evacuation policy with the individuals in your work group or your department. Review them with your team periodically to make sure that every member knows where the safest evacuation route is, and if there are multiple evacuation routes from your work area, that you review that with them. Also, if there's a shelter-in-place location within your building, make sure they know that as well. Know the building and department's safe assembly point outside of the building and how to get there from each one of the evacuation points. Be familiar with your responsibility as a supervisor or a manager, such as shutdown procedures, if you have specialty equipment, or anything in your area that has to have a certain protocol to safeguard that equipment or that area upon evacuation. Every one of our sites has something called a need to know list for that particular building, which goes floor by floor, which essentially covers where is the nearest fire extinguisher, where are the nearest emergency exits, where's the nearest fire alarm pull station, where's the nearest AED, where's the nearest evacuation chair. Practice with your team members how to respond in certain emergencies. Do a query of each one of your team members, like where's the nearest fire extinguisher, where's the nearest fire alarm pull station, where are the emergency evacuation exits. Query them on that information, just so that you are also aware, but they are also aware. And lastly, take all drills seriously. If the fire alarm goes off, don't assume it's a drill. Assume it's a real emergency and act accordingly. And stress the importance of all drills with your team. If you're a line employee or a volunteer, also know what your responsibilities are, what you can do to make everyone more prepared, as well as yourself. Every employee is trained as a new hire, as well as our volunteers. We do provide refresher training on a periodic basis. Communicate with your team captain or floor captain or co-captain or your manager in advance of any planned absence you may have, so that if you have particular responsibility in the event of an evacuation, that your manager or supervisor can assign that responsibility to another member within your work group or your department. If you have any safety questions regarding emergency evacuation, emergency procedures, emergency equipment, bring them to my attention. I'll be more than happy to try to answer your question as quickly as possible. And if not, I'll look up that information and get back to you when I do have that information available. You as an employee should also review the evacuation plans. Once you get to your department, take a look, see where the floor maps are. Identify where you're located. Identify where the very nearest safety pieces of equipment are. Go find where the AED is. Go find where the fire extinguisher is. Go find where the 2 emergency exits are, or the evacuation chair. Know where your building or department's assembly point is outside. Take all drills seriously and participate accordingly. Practice with your team members any specific responses that you have in the event of an emergency. Lastly, general safety considerations for all employees. And these apply to everyone, regardless of your position. And they're just general safety considerations that you should think about on a day-to-day basis. And these these items are basically to ensure and safeguard personal and health center property and personal safety. First of all, make sure you wear and safeguard your access control badge at all times at all Whitman-Walker Health locations once you're issued your badge by Human Resources. We have a number of internal and external access control points where you have to scan your badge. Without that badge, you cannot get in the building or you cannot have access within the building itself if someone provides you access. So once you're issued your badge by HR, make sure you use it and you wear it and you safeguard it. That badge has multiple purposes. It has your ID on it that identifies you by photo to other coworkers, to our patients and clients, and to visitors. It also identifies you by name and with whatever credential you may have as a physician, as a medical care provider, as a behavioral health provider, or whatever your position may be. And then lastly, it also provides you access into and out of and around the buildings. If you lose or break your badge, immediately notify HR as well as myself, so we can make provision to either deactivate the badge and or replace it as necessary. Close and lock the door of your office or workspace, no matter how short the time you may be away from the destination. Safeguard any assigned office and storage cabinet keys. Make sure you lock your personal property in a secure location, especially if you're in a shared work office, team room, or open work area. Don't leave any of your valuables out when you're not around. If you do have a private office where you meet patients or visitors, never leave those individuals in the office alone and leave your valuables out and or patient information accessible. If you happen to be within any one of our controlled work areas, such as a medical area within one of the buildings, and you find an individual who seems to be in that area, but they're out of place or they're lost, don't hesitate to query them politely and ask them if you can provide them assistance or they guide them to a particular location or an individual. If there's any suspicious activity or individual within any one of our facilities, don't hesitate to notify a supervisor or a manager immediately so they can identify that individual accordingly and take whatever action may be necessary. If you work in a department where you may have to come in particularly early, or you have to work particularly late, or you come in outside of normal working hours, such as on a weekend, make sure that all exterior doors are closed behind you. That's whether entering or departing. If you're entering outside of normal hours and there's an individual at that door who wants to come in with you, do not provide them access. No piggybacking. You tell the individual that they either need to contact the individual, the staff member, who is supposed to be their escort or with whom they have an appointment, or they have to wait for the building to open and provide normal access that way. If for whatever reason, when you're on site, you feel that your personal safety, that of another individual, or the facility is at risk, don't hesitate to call or text 911. And the last two items that I'm going to talk about are kind of catchphrases. For those of you who use the Washington Metro system, you may or may not recognize the catchphrase and or the posters that you see around. You know, if you see something, say something. Lastly, and I always repeat myself with this, safety in the workplace is everyone's responsibility. It's not just my responsibility as a director of facilities. Safety is everyone's responsibility. If you see something that seems to be out of place, to be risky, to be a potential trip hazard or a safety hazard of some sort, do something about it. Notify someone. Take some action. Never assume it's somebody else's job. Because if everyone thought that way and overlooked any sort of safety risk, and you were the next individual coming by, and you suffered some sort of injury or damage as a result of somebody else's negligence, you would be angry because you would think, well, why didn't somebody before me notice that and do something about it? So safety is everyone's responsibility. I conclude my presentation with 3 important emails that everyone should remember. If you have a facilities request or a facilities problem, email facilities@whitman-walker.org, and that will generate a work order to me. And that is basically anything with regards to the buildings, with the infrastructure, with offices, lighting, temperature, access badge, anything like that, that comes to facilities. Anything dealing with an IT request, such as computers, copiers, printers, that goes to IT support at whitman-walker.org. And that includes trying to log on to a copier with your access badge. And lastly, anything dealing with human resources. go to hrsupport@whitmanwalker.org. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time and attention. Welcome to Whitman-Walker. I look forward to meeting you once you arrive. And do not hesitate if you have any questions about this presentation or anything that I've covered in today's presentation. Do not hesitate to reach out to me once you arrive on site. And welcome to Whitman-Walker. Thank you.
Great job, Tom.